There's an ancient story from the Chandogya Upanishad about a young man named Svetaketu who returns home after 12 years of studying the Vedas. He's memorized countless hymns, mastered rituals, can recite sacred texts for hours. His father, Uddalaka, looks at him and asks a simple question. Have you asked for that instruction by which we hear what cannot be heard, perceive what cannot be perceived, know what cannot be known? Svetaketu is confused. He's studied everything. His father takes him to get a glass of water. He drops salt into it, stirs, and asks his son to retrieve the salt. Svetaketu can't. The salt has dissolved completely. Taste the water from the top, his father says. Salty, Svetaketu replies. Taste from the middle. Salty. Taste from the bottom. Still salty. You cannot see the salt, Uddalaka tells his son, yet it pervades the entire glass. In the same way, that subtle essence pervades all reality. It is the self of all that is, tattvam asi, that thou art. 12 years of learning, and Svetaketu's real education had just begun. We live in a world obsessed with accumulation. We collect degrees, credentials, experiences, identities. We build carefully curated versions of ourselves, a professional self, a social media self, a family self, a private self. We fracture ourselves into 1,000 pieces, each performing for a different audience. And somewhere beneath all that performance, a question whispers, who am I really? Beneath all these masks, all these roles, all these stories I tell about myself, what remains? Vedanta emerged over 3,000 years ago as an attempt to answer that question, not with more accumulation, not with more identity construction, but with something far more radical, the systematic dismantling of every false identity until only truth remains. This is not philosophy as intellectual exercise. This is philosophy as spiritual surgery. The word Vedanta means the end of the Vedas, not as termination, but as culmination, as the goal toward which everything points. The Vedas themselves are among humanity's oldest surviving texts, composed in Sanskrit between 1500 and 500 BCE in the Indus Valley. They contain hymns, rituals, cosmology, the entire religious framework of ancient India. But tucked away in the later portions of these texts, something different emerges, the Upanishads, which means sitting down near a teacher to receive secret knowledge. Between 800 and 200 BCE, these philosophical dialogues began to question everything that came before them. The early Vedas focused on external ritual, sacrifice to the gods, proper ceremonies, maintaining cosmic order through action. The Upanishads shifted focus inward. What good are 1,000 rituals if you don't understand the reality behind them? What value are external gods if you're ignorant of the divine within? This wasn't rebellion, it was deepening. The Upanishads took the scattered hints and mystical passages in the earlier Vedas and developed them into a systematic inquiry into the nature of reality and self. The most important Upanishads, Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Katha, Mandukya, Isha, Kena, were not written by single authors, but emerged from teaching lineages, sages and students, sitting in forest retreats, conducting dialogues that would shape human consciousness for millennia. Then came Adi Shankara. Around 788 CE, a young Brahmin from Kerala in southern India began walking across the subcontinent. By the time he died at age 32, Shankara had systematized Vedanta philosophy, established 4 major monasteries at the cardinal points of India, defeated numerous philosophical opponents in debate, and written commentaries on the principal Upanishads that remain authoritative today. His interpretation? Advaita Vedanta, or non-dual Vedanta, became the dominant school. Advaita means not two. Reality is not divided into subject and object, self and other, spirit and matter. These divisions are apparent only, the result of ignorance. Ultimate reality is one, without second. Shankara didn't invent this idea. He found it woven throughout the Upanishads. His genius was making it systematic, defensible, teachable. Other schools of Vedanta emerged. Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita, which preserved some distinction between self and ultimate reality. Madhva's Dvaita, which insisted on complete dualism between individual souls and God. But Shankara's non-dualism captured something essential in the Upanishadic vision, the radical unity behind apparent multiplicity. The Bhagavad Gita, composed around 200 BCE, became Vedanta's most accessible text. Set as a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna on a battlefield, the Gita synthesized Upanishadic philosophy with practical ethics. It asked, how do we live in the world once we understand the nature of reality? That question would echo for millennia. At the core of Vedanta sits a single proposition, so simple it can be stated in 3 Sanskrit words. Tat tvam asi. That thou art. You are that ultimate reality you've been seeking outside yourself. But to understand this, we need to examine what Vedanta means by that, and what it means by you. Brahman is the Vedantic term for ultimate reality, not a god in the personal sense, not a being among other beings, but being itself, existence, consciousness, bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. Brahman is not an object that can be known the way you know a chair or a person. It's the knowing itself. It's the ground of all experience, the substratum of all existence. The Upanishads describe Brahman through negation, neti neti, and not this, not that. Every attribute you assign to it falls short, because every attribute is a limitation. To say Brahman is good implies it could be something other than good. To say it is conscious implies it could be unconscious. Brahman transcends all categories, because categories themselves arise within Brahman. And here's where it gets interesting. You, the reading consciousness encountering these words right now, are not what you think you are. Vedanta distinguishes between the ego self, jiva, and the true self, Atman. The jiva is everything you normally identify as you, I, your name, history, personality, thoughts, emotions, body, social roles. It's the constructed self, the accumulated self, the self that changes moment to moment. Atman is what remains when all that falls away, pure consciousness, awareness itself, prior to content, the witness behind every experience. And according to Vedanta's central insight, Atman is Brahman. Your deepest self is identical to ultimate reality. The consciousness looking through your eyes is the same consciousness that underlies the entire universe. Not similar to it, not connected to it, identical with it. This is not metaphor. This is meant literally. But if this is true, why doesn't it seem true? Why do we experience ourselves as separate, limited, mortal beings? Enter Maya. Maya is often translated as illusion, but that's misleading. Maya is not hallucination. The world you experience is real at its level. Maya is better understood as the power by which Brahman appears as multiplicity. It's the creative force that generates apparent distinction where none ultimately exists. Think of it like water appearing as ice, steam, clouds, waves, different forms, different properties, different behaviors, yet all fundamentally H2O. Maya is what makes singular consciousness appear as many beings, many objects, many experiences. The Upanishads use the metaphor of rope and snake. In dim light, you mistake a coiled rope for a snake. You experience real fear, real physical reactions. The snake experience is genuine, but the snake itself has no independent existence. It's a superimposition onto the rope. When light comes, the snake vanishes instantly. Not because it went somewhere, but because it was never there as a separate entity. Similarly, the separate self you experience is a superimposition onto the underlying unity of Atman Brahman. It's not that you don't exist, but you don't exist the way you think you exist. This condition of mistaken identity is called avidya, ignorance, or better, misknowing. You know yourself incorrectly, And this fundamental misknowing generates all suffering. Because once you believe you're a separate, limited entity, fear arises, desire arises, the entire drama of protection, acquisition, and defense unfolds. You spend your life trying to secure and enhance something that doesn't exist the way you think it does. So how does one move from avidya to vidya, from ignorance to knowledge? Vedanta's primary method is jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge or discrimination. This is not intellectual knowledge, not conceptual understanding, but direct realization of what you actually are. The practice begins with viveka, discrimination between the real and unreal, the permanent and impermanent, the self and not self. You systematically examine every aspect of your experience and ask, is this what I truly am? The body? No. You observe the body, so you must be something other than it. The body changes continuously from birth to death, yet something in you recognizes continuity. That witnessing awareness cannot be what it witnesses. Thoughts. No. Thoughts come and go. You watch them arise and dissolve. What you are must be what's watching, not what's being watched. Emotions. Same principle. Emotions are objects of awareness, not awareness itself. Even the sense of being a person with a history. No. Memory is just another mental object. The consciousness that knows memory is prior to memory. This process of discrimination, neti, not this, not that, strips away everything that can be objectified until only the subject remains. Pure awareness, witnessing consciousness, Atman. But this is not a purely intellectual exercise. It's accompanied by meditation practices designed to stabilize awareness in its own nature. One classic method is the meditation on I am, iku, Atma Vichara, or self-inquiry, particularly emphasized later by Ramana Maharshi in the 20th century. You trace the sense of I back to its source. Every thought can be seen as a modification of the basic I thought. I am hungry. I am thinking. I am confused. Follow that, I back. Where does it arise from? What's aware of the I? This is not narcissistic self-involvement. It's the most radical kind of investigation. Questioning the very foundation of personal identity. The Upanishads also teach through Mahavakyas, great statements that point directly to reality, tat tvam asi, that thou art. Aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Ayam atma Brahma, this self is Brahman. Prajnanam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. These aren't meant to be merely believed or repeated. They're contemplated, meditated upon, tested against experience, until they're realized as direct truth. There's another story from the Katha Upanishad. A young boy named Nachiketa is accidentally sent to the realm of death by his angry father. Yama, the god of death, is away. Nachiketa waits at his door for 3 days without food or water. When Yama returns and finds this Brahmin boy waiting, he's mortified. As compensation for his rudeness, he offers Nachiketa 3 boons, 3 wishes for anything he desires. Nachiketa uses the first boon to restore his relationship with his father, the second to learn the sacred fire ritual that grants heaven. But for the third, he asks the ultimate question. When a person dies, some say they continue to exist. Others say they don't. Which is true? Teach me this. Yama tries to deflect, ask for anything else. Wealth, long life, power, pleasure. But Nachiketa refuses. He wants only this knowledge. Finally, Yama teaches him. The Atman, the true self, is never born and never dies. It's eternal, unchanging, beyond all transformation. Bodies come and go like clothes being changed. But what you truly are is untouched by birth and death. This is not comforting philosophy to ease the fear of death. This is direct knowledge that reveals death as a misconception. What dies? The body, the personality, the accumulated identity. What you truly are was never born. How could it die? But here's where Vedanta becomes dangerous if misunderstood. If everything is ultimately one, if the world is Maya, if individual identity is illusion, why do anything? Why not just sit in meditation and ignore the world? This spiritual bypass, using philosophy to escape rather than engage, is one of Vedanta's great pitfalls. The Bhagavad Gita addresses this directly. Arjuna, facing the horror of fighting his own relatives in battle, wants to renounce action. He wants to retreat into spiritual contemplation. Krishna's entire teaching is a refutation of this impulse. You cannot escape action. Even sitting still, you're acting. Even renouncing, you're choosing. The question is not whether to act, but how to act, whether from ego identification or from understanding of reality. Karma yoga. The yoga of action means acting without attachment to results, without the binding sense that I am the doer. You fulfill your responsibilities, engage fully with the world, but without the anxious grasping that comes from believing you're a separate self that must protect and enhance itself. This is often misunderstood as passivity or fatalism. It's neither. It's the most effective kind of action that flows from clarity rather than confusion, from wholeness rather than fragmentation. A surgeon operates with full attention and skill, but a good surgeon isn't desperately attached to the outcome in a way that compromises judgment. There's engagement, without anxious identification. That's karma yoga. Similarly, Vedanta's teaching that the world is Maya doesn't mean the world doesn't matter. It means the world doesn't exist the way you think it exists. And this distinction changes everything. If you know you're dreaming, you can still engage with the dream, but you're no longer terrified by dream monsters or enslaved by dream desires. The dream continues, but your relationship to it transforms. Vedanta at its best generates profound compassion. If the same Atman is in every being, if separation is apparent only, then harming another is harming yourself, not metaphorically, literally. Service to others becomes service to the self in another form. But Vedanta at its worst becomes spiritual narcissism. I am Brahman becomes an ego trip. Everything is illusion becomes an excuse to avoid responsibility. Non-duality becomes a conceptual position defended against other positions, which is itself dualistic thinking. Shankara himself warned against this. Realization of Brahman isn't a state of consciousness you achieve. It's the recognition of what's already true. You can't become Brahman. You can only stop believing you're something other than Brahman. In our modern world of fractured identity and performed selves, Vedanta offers something radical. Not another identity to construct, not another achievement to pursue, but a complete exit from the entire game of identity construction. Every social media profile, every carefully crafted bio, every strategic self-presentation. Vedanta sees through all of it, not cynically, but with compassion. These are the movements of the jiva, the constructed self, trying desperately to secure something that doesn't need securing. What you truly are is already whole, already complete, already free. It doesn't need enhancement or protection because it's not diminishable or threatenable. This doesn't mean the personality doesn't matter at the relative level, but it means you're no longer enslaved by the anxiety of maintaining it. Consumer culture depends on the belief that you're incomplete and need external things to complete you. Vedanta reveals this as the fundamental lie. Not that you shouldn't have things or enjoy things, but that things cannot address the core sense of lack, because that lack is based on mistaken identity. The environmental crisis too reflects Vedantic ignorance at a collective level. The illusion of separation from nature. The belief that we're isolated entities manipulating an external world generates the exploitation that's destroying the planet. Vedanta's recognition of fundamental unity could reshape how we inhabit the earth. But this requires more than intellectual agreement. Vedanta is not a philosophy to believe, it's a truth to realize. So what would it look like to actually engage with Vedanta? Not as historical information, but as living practice. It begins with what's called Shravana, hearing the teaching. not casual hearing, but deep listening to the words of the Upanishads, to teachers in the lineage, to the pointing out instructions that direct attention toward what you are. Then comes manana, reflection and contemplation, taking the teaching into deep consideration, testing it against experience, wrestling with apparent contradictions. The mind needs to process, question, integrate. Finally, nididhyasana, profound meditation on the truth that's been heard and reflected upon. This is where intellectual understanding ripens into direct realization. The practice is supported by what Vedanta calls the 4 qualifications: a. Viveka, discrimination; vairagya, dispassion; shatsampat, 6 virtues including tranquility and self-control; and mumukshutva, intense desire for liberation. These aren't moral rules imposed externally. They're recognitions of what supports inquiry and what obstructs it. A mind caught in addiction, distraction, endless drama can't sustain the attention needed for self-inquiry, not because such a mind is bad, but because it's occupied elsewhere. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect to practice Vedanta. It means the practice itself gradually clarifies the mind, making deeper inquiry possible. And ultimately, the practice culminates in what's called moksha, liberation, not liberation from something, but liberation as the recognition of what's always already free. You were never bound. You only believed you were bound. Liberation is seeing through that belief. The salt is in the water. It always was. Svetaketu spent 12 years looking everywhere else before his father showed him the obvious. How much of your life have you spent looking for yourself in external achievements, relationships, experiences, identities? How much energy goes into maintaining and defending a self that, when investigated, cannot be found? Vedanta doesn't ask you to believe anything. It invites you to look, not with the eyes, but with awareness itself. To turn attention back on itself and discover what's looking, not as a weekend workshop or a passing spiritual experience, but as a sustained inquiry into the most fundamental question: who am I? The answer isn't a concept. It's not something you can think your way to. It's what remains when thinking stops. It's what's here before thought arises and after thought dissolves. It's reading these words right now: Tattvam Asi, that thou art.